Hi, we're out on our range today, and once again, no, you haven't won a prize. That's a scam. And today is going to be my technique for shooting my Rossi coach gun, part 2. And the first thing I have to say is my sincere apologies for wasting your time with this. But looking at the commentary that was generated on part 1, it became obvious that part 2 is necessary. Now, this is my Rossi coach gun. It's double-barreled side-by-side with exposed hammers, double triggers. 12 gauge with a 3-inch chamber, 20.5-inch barrels. The right barrel is improved cylinder bore, left barrel is modified choke. Now let me give you a brief synopsis of what brought us here today. A while ago I did a presentation testing the water resistance of plastic and paper shot shells. Spoiler alert, I found that both the plastic and the paper could be completely submerged in water for over an hour and they all still shot just fine. But my test gun in that presentation was my Rossi coach gun, and there was a reason for that. I envisioned that especially the paper shells, after being underwater that long, might lose some of their integrity, and I might shoot one and then pull it out and find that some of the cardboard had torn and was still in the chamber. And it's a whole lot easier to see that pulling it out of the double barrel than trying to find whatever ejected from an autoloader or a pump. I also envisioned I might have partial ignition on some of those rounds, and so I'd have to check the bores for obstruction, and looking down the bores of a double barrel is a whole lot easier than looking down the bore of an autoloader or a pump. Yes, I really do have thought out, logical, pragmatic reasons behind just about everything I do. Okay, well, in watching that demonstration, there were people who saw the way I was operating this gun and they had questions about what I'm doing and why. So we did a presentation explaining my technique. And keep in mind, this is just how I operate this shotgun. I'm in no way trying to tell you how to operate yours. But in doing that demonstration, it became obvious, seeing some of the questions people were asking and the commentary that we're making, that part 2 was necessary. And this really has to do with something that I forgot. And there's no excuse for it. I shouldn't forget this. It's not only something that I deal with in this format, it's something that I have dealt with in every aspect of my life for the entirety of my life. And I shouldn't forget it, but sometimes I do. Now, what am I talking about? We'll get to that in a few minutes. So first, let me briefly recap the technique I'm using for shooting this gun and explain why, and then we'll get to people's questions and commentary. In discussing my technique for shooting this gun, it has to start with me saying that this is an earplug case. I have earplugs in my ears right now. I use earplugs with every shot I take. Okay, that having been said, when using this gun, and I'm going to use the example of for hunting, I'll typically have it at some kind of low ready, and then when I see a bird fly or a rabbit run, I will, as I bring it up, cock the right hammer, fire, take it out of my shoulder to cock the left hammer, fire, and then start the reloading process. In hunting shotguns, it is not always the case, but typically the right barrel will have less choke than the left barrel. The concept is that you will usually shoot the right barrel first, and if you hit whatever you're shooting at, great. But if you don't, when you shoot the second shot, whatever you're shooting at is probably farther away, so the left barrel has more choke. This also will allow you to, if you're getting a still shot at something that's farther away, you may choose to cock the left hammer and shoot the left barrel first because it has more choke for that farther shot. Not typically the case when I'm shooting this shotgun. So when I do this in real time, it will look something like this. And then I'll start reloading. Now, part of this is I'll take the shell out of the right barrel and use it to help me get the shell out of the left barrel. Why? Because the previous owner of this particular gun allowed the left chamber to get a little rusty. I've honed it out, but it's still a little bit rough, and it can be difficult to get the shell out of the left barrel. one of the idiosyncrasies of this particular gun. Another question is, why would I shoot the right barrel first? Well, I explained that about the choke. It's also easier for me to reach the right hammer first. And as far as taking it out of my shoulder to cock the left hammer, that's just because if it's in my shoulder, reaching that is difficult, at least for me, with this gun. Now, there's some other things that go into this. One of the questions is, why do I not cock both hammers, bring it up, and then fire and fire? That's a good question. The answer is because if I just cock one hammer, it's about that fast. If I try to cock both of them, it takes longer. And so if I see a bird flying, I can get on it a lot quicker. If I take time to cock both hammers, that bird might be gone. There's also some safety concerns in that. Now, before I get to those safety concerns, let me show you a close-up of how this gun operates. Now, the way this gun works is you push this lever to the right to unlock it and open it. Some shotguns will allow you to push this either direction. This one will not. It only goes to the right. And once you open it, then you put in your 2 shells and close it. The right hammer works the right barrel. The right hammer is activated by the front trigger, the left hammer by the rear trigger. The mnemonic device I use is you're either right out front or you're left behind. Now, as I said, one reason for only cocking one hammer at a time is it allows me to shoot my first shot faster. The other reason for only cocking one hammer at a time is safety. And a big part of safety is when you teach little kids how to shoot a particular gun and you teach them the safe way to do it, you stick with those things as you go on through your life. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say I see a deer out there, but it's in the bushes. I can't identify it as a legitimate target yet. So I get ready and I cock both hammers. Okay, I'm ready. And then it comes into view and it's a doe. Now I have to lower both of these hammers, and some of you already know where I'm going with this. The way you do that is I will firmly put my thumb on the right hammer, pull the front trigger, let the hammer go forward just a little bit, then take my finger off the trigger and lower that to the half-cock position. This shotgun has rebounding hammers. And then repeat that with the left barrel. I can't stress enough, you got to make sure you're pointed in a safe direction. Now, when I do this, I can make it look fairly easy because I've practiced it many, many times over a period of decades. But it is extremely important to do it correctly, and there's a big safety aspect to it. Again, let me show you a close-up. So you have both hammers cocked, then you need to lower your hammer. So you put your thumb on the right hammer and then carefully pull the wrong trigger. People will accidentally pull the rear trigger and then they'll have a negligent discharge. And what can compound this is, after that happens and they're rattled, then they'll accidentally pull the front trigger and have 2 negligent discharges. Now, another safety aspect of cocking both hammers and why I don't do it is some people will, instead of using just a trigger finger, on a gun like this, they'll want to use 2 fingers, one on each trigger. They are not intending to shoot both barrels at once. Their thought is that they can shoot faster if they do one than the other. Sometimes people will get rattled and pull both at once when they didn't intend to. Sometimes they won't pull both, but they'll pull the first one and the recoil will make their finger hit the second one. And so you end up with 2 shots in such rapid succession, you may as well shot both at once. And that is most often a very unpleasant experience for the shooter. Okay, another aspect of safety on cocking both hammers, and why I very seldom do it, has to do with something called buck fever. Now, I'd like to think that I've been doing this long enough that I'm not going to have some panic reaction. But again, you learn things when you're starting out and you stick with them. Now, most people are familiar with pre-shot buck fever. Some people haven't put a lot of thought into post-shot buck fever. Now, pre-shot buck fever is when someone sees what they're going to shoot and they get so rattled that they come up and forget to cock the hammer, or for other types of guns, forget to disengage the safety, or they try to hit the safety button but instead hit the magazine release button, and the list goes on. And I'm sure many of you have seen these kind of things happen. Okay, post-shot buck fever is someone will cock both hammers, and then he's going to shoot at whatever he's going to shoot at, and he gets it, and then he's so excited about having gotten it that he will do his celebratory dance. Oh boy, forgetting he's still got one hammer cocked. Not a position you want to be in. And these are the aspects of shooting this particular gun and why I do it the way I do it. Okay, that was the very brief recap of my technique for shooting this Rossi coach gun. Now, let's talk about some of the questions and commentary that arose. Well, I couldn't have timed this any better. They just showed up by sheer coincidence. And this is one of the things I wanted to discuss. These are mule deer. And there's a bunch of wild mule deer. There are a few whitetails in the area, but mostly mule deer. And they show up here whenever they please. Now, a lot of people think that deer have this sense of when it is or isn't deer season and they know which is which. That's a topic for another time. But these deer come and go as they please, and they are not bothered by me at all. Now, the reason this is relevant in the commentary we got on part 1 is that if you've watched very much of my work, you know that the deer show up occasionally. And as long as I don't try to get any closer to them than about 10 or 15 feet, they don't care what I'm doing, and I don't care what they're doing as long as they stay out of the line of fire. But part 1 of this presentation was the first time anybody has ever accused me, and there were a lot of people who made this accusation, of using a green screen. Okay, to quote someone we all know, come on, man. A green screen? Now, Brad, the post-production guy, he's pretty good at what he does, but a green screen? If you've seen the chart I make when I'm chronographing different types of ammo, our chart is just something I wrote on a piece of paper with a black magic marker. We're not that high-tech around here. Other people seem to think that this was some kind of high-fence deer park. No, it isn't. These are wild animals that come and go as they please. And this time of year, they're not very aggressive. Other times of year, I don't like to turn my back on them. Now, a couple more things to address about the deer. 1, these are mule deer, not elk. 2, when we do our meat target demonstrations and we use our orange lung tissue, yeah, the deer really don't like oranges. Now, another comment that came up a lot was people telling me various different versions of my hammer lowering technique is incorrect. I'm doing it wrong. Okay. When hunting with a double-barreled shotgun that has exposed hammers, or a single-shot shotgun, or a lot of different types of lever-action rifles, and the list goes on, properly lowering your hammer is a very big part, a very important part of working that firearm. What happens a lot when you're in the field with firearms like this is you're looking around and a bird flies. Oh wait, that was a robin, not a quail. Now I have to lower that hammer. And if I do it wrong, the gun will go off. And the technique is firmly putting my thumb on the hammer and holding it while I pull the trigger, hold the trigger, ease the hammer forward just a little, then let off the trigger and ease the hammer forward the rest of the way into the half-cock position. This gun has rebounding hammers. If I don't do that correctly and my thumb slips off at the wrong time, the gun will go off. Now, a lot of people told me I'm doing it wrong and what I should do is open the action. That way, if when I'm easing the hammer forward, my thumb slips off, so what? The firing pin won't hit the primer. It won't go off. Okay. Let me see if I can explain this. And I'm going to start with a close-up of how this Beretta 92FS works. Here's the Beretta 92FS pistol in caliber 9x19. It's a double to single action autoloader. As I start to pull this trigger, you can see the hammer coming back until it gets completely through the cycle, and then it goes off. Now it cocks itself again, so all subsequent trigger pulls are much shorter. Now, what happens when I don't want to shoot any more rounds? I have to lower that hammer. And you'll do it just like the shotgun. Hold the hammer, ease that forward. Except it has the same concerns. If I do it wrong, it'll go off. So they built in a hammer drop. Push this lever down, the hammer drops. When that happens, it will not go off. Reactivate the trigger and put it back in my holster. Okay, that was interesting, but what does that have to do with the way the Rossi coach gun works? Bear with me for just a moment while I show you a close-up of how this Beretta Model 21A works. The Beretta 21A is also a double to single action autoloader. First trigger pull is long, then the gun goes off, cocks itself, subsequent trigger pulls are much shorter. However, this does not have a hammer drop. This is a safety, but it does not have a hammer drop. So to lower the hammer on this gun, I have to hold down the hammer, pull the trigger and hold it, ease that hammer forward, let off the trigger again, lower the hammer to the half-cock position. If I do it wrong, the gun will go off. So, if my hammer is cocked, something I can do on this gun is it has a tip-up barrel. I can just take that barrel out of battery, then lower the hammer, and if I do it wrong, the firing pin doesn't hit anything. Opening the action before lowering the hammer can be a good idea. So depending on what model of firearm you have, opening the action or getting the barrel out of battery before lowering the hammer can be a good idea. However, it is not applicable in this case. Let me show you a close-up. On the Rossi coach gun, press your barrel release lever to the right and it opens. However, if that hammer is cocked, it blocks this release lever. It will not open while that hammer is cocked. Now, if the left hammer is cocked, I can do that, but since I'm typically pulling the right hammer first, that technique does not work with this shotgun. Now here's another side-by-side double-barreled shotgun with exposed hammers. This is a very old gun. It has Damascus barrels. I know it was made in Belgium, but I don't know what brand it is. Let's take a close-up look at this. Some guns will allow this lever to be pushed either direction. This one won't. It only goes to the right, and it opens the gun. But if that right hammer is cocked, it blocks this lever. It won't open while the hammer is cocked. Now here's another old shotgun, side-by-side double-barrel exposed hammers. This is a W.C. Scott & Son, and it was made in the later 1800s. Let's take a close-up look at this. Now on this one, you cannot push that lever to the left, only to the right. And if the hammer is cocked, it actually gives you a little space. I can push that over and open the chamber while that hammer is cocked. So in this case, if I wanted to lower the hammer, I could open the gun first and then do it. And that would add a measure of safety. So we see that the idea of opening the action before lowering the hammer can be done with some firearms, but not all of them, and certainly not this one. Now there was one person who worded his comment in such a way, and I'll try to get it right. You can always open the action before lowering the hammer. No, I can't do that with this gun. And I'm going to say that words like always or never are very seldom appropriate when talking about firearms. They don't all work the same way. And worse than the comment telling me you can always open the action was the one person that replied to that comment and wrote, "I'm surprised Paul didn't see that." I don't recall exactly when I obtained this shotgun, but I do know that it was before the turn of the century. I've had it for a long time. Did you really think that in all of that time, I never learned how it works? So a lot of people told me I was doing it wrong based on their ignorance of how my Rossi coach gun works. But there was one person in particular that told me not only was I doing it wrong with the double-barreled shotgun, but the concept of opening the action a little bit before lowering the hammer was the right way to do it with lever-action rifles. Are you sure about that? Let's take a close-up look at how this Marlin works. This is a Marlin model 444S in caliber .444 Marlin. If I were to chamber around, of course it's empty right now, but if I were to chamber around, the hammer is cocked, I do the same thing of hold down the hammer, pull the trigger, ease the hammer forward, let off the trigger, lower the hammer to the half-cock position. But if the hammer were cocked and I wanted to open the action just a little bit, so that's open a little and then pull the trigger to let the hammer go forward, you can't do that. If you look very close right here, you can see there's a trigger block. Unless that lever is locked shut, you can't pull the trigger. If it's open just a little bit, that trigger block comes into place. You can't pull the trigger if the action is open. Not only does the Model 444S work that way, but every Marlin rifle in the 336 series that I've ever seen works the same way. But what about other lever-action rifles? This one is made by Uberti, but it's an exact replica of a Winchester Model 1873. Let's take a close-up look at how it works. Now with this Winchester design, if I open the action a little bit, you can see that it has a trigger block very similar to the Marlin. If I try to pull the trigger while the action is open a little, it won't go. Not only that, if I close the action completely, it still won't unless I squeeze the lever, which acts as a grip safety, moving that trigger block out of the way so I can lower the hammer. Now let's try one more lever action rifle. This is a Henry and it's in caliber .22 long rifle. Let's take a close-up look at this. With a Henry, if I open the action, you can see that there is no trigger block. So the concept is, with the action completely closed, I go to lower that hammer, my thumb slips off, we have a negligent discharge. So to avoid that, I'll open the action just a little bit, then put my thumb on the hammer, pull the trigger, ease that forward, take my finger off the trigger, let it go forward to half cock, and then close the action, and that would be safer. So with that in mind, the idea then is that if I go to lower that and my thumb slips off, that wouldn't be a negligent discharge because the action's open a little. Okay, let's load the rifle and put that to the test. So we have our Henry loaded, we put a round in the chamber, now we need to lower this hammer. Ease it forward a little, finger off the trigger, lower it to half cock. Again, as I'm doing this, if my thumb slips off, we have a negligent discharge. Okay, so the idea, open the chamber just a little, lower that to half cock, close the chamber. Well, that's fine when I do it correctly. But if we've got it cocked, open the chamber just a little, go to lower it, and my thumb slips off, now that did not go off. Okay, let's try that again. Open the chamber just a little, ease that forward. Oh, my thumb slipped off, and it didn't go off. Alrighty. So it would appear that doing that on this particular rifle has perhaps some merit. Now I took the round out of the chamber on the Henry rifle, and this round where I dropped the hammer and it didn't go off because the action was a little bit open, upon close examination, it does have just a little bit of a firing pin dent in it. So although it didn't go off in this case, I'm going to say there's still a degree of danger in using that technique, and I'm going to tell you that I'm not going to do it, even on the few lever action rifles that do allow you to lower the hammer with the action open. Not only am I not going to do it, I really recommend that you don't do it either. I think you're far better off just making sure your rifle is pointed in a safe direction and learning how to properly lower the hammer. So what we have is someone telling me that I'm doing it wrong based on their complete ignorance of how my Rossi Coach gun works. And then that same person offering you advice on how you should lower the hammer on your lever action rifle based on their complete ignorance of how most lever action rifles work. And even on those few lever action rifles that will allow you to lower the hammer while the action is partially open, I'm going to say that was bad advice. Now, another thing I want to address is I talked about the safety concerns of post-shot buck fever, where people can be really celebratory, and I illustrated that by doing a hyperbolic dance while I'm standing there with the shotgun. And if someone does that, having cocked both hammers, only fired one barrel, therefore doing that while they still have one hammer cocked, big safety concern. Now, that generated a lot of commentary, but I want to talk about 3 types of commentary that generated. One was people watching that dance and saying they would never want to hunt with anybody who did something like that. Okay, that's a good idea. The second was people sharing their own anecdotes of things like that they had experienced. Now, there's one in particular that I want to point out. And if I understood correctly what he was saying, said that he was hunting with his either daughter or granddaughter, and I got the impression from the way he wrote it that when this happened, she was not an adult. Well, they see a deer out there about 200 yards. He gets her squared away to take the shot. But just in case he needs to back her up, he cocks the hammer on his rifle. Well, she fired. Deer dropped in its tracks. Good job! And they go up there and deal with it. Walk up there the 200 yards that are dealing with the deer, and in that process, he discovered, and the way he wrote it was, much to his horror, that's the word he used, he saw that he had left his rifle cocked the whole time. Okay, that is what I'm talking about. I just used a hyperbolic dance to make the point. Now, comments like that where people share anecdotes, as long as they're not tall tales, those are really destructive and tedious. And in this case, I'm sure this was not a tall tale. I'm sure it happened just the way he described it. But anecdotes like that are very helpful. He's talking about he made a mistake. Luckily, no one was hurt, but he learned from it. And by sharing it, now we can all learn from that. And comments like that, again, are really appreciated. Okay, the third type of comment was from people watching that and saying that was stupid and no one would ever do that. And there was one person in particular that said, in his 41 years of life, he's never seen anybody do that. Okay, well, the mistake I made was making that point with the hyperbolic dance without telling a couple of dawn of time explanation, anecdote type things of what I was talking about. You got to understand that when I say things like that, I don't make these things up. All of these points I make are based on things I have personally seen. Now, let me tell you 2 anecdotes. One, we're jackrabbit hunting. There's a group of 5 of us. It's rolling hills of sagebrush, and we're in a spot where the sagebrush is waist high or more. And we're up on a ridge, and you're looking down into this depression, and there's a rabbit in there, and you see it just for a second as it runs here and there. And everybody wanted to let Chuck shoot this rabbit because he really wanted to shoot something with his Ruger Vaquero. Okay, and so it takes a few minutes while he shuffles a few feet over, shuffles a few feet over, and finally he gets us lined up between the bushes where he can see it. Now I'm clear at the end of this line, and I can see where everybody's looking, but I can't see the rabbit. And finally, when he really is aiming at it, okay, looks like he's about to shoot, and I can see about where he's aiming. Okay, so I'm gonna look and see if I can see the rabbit run or anything. He fires, and again, I couldn't see it at the time, but the way he described it later was that that rabbit was sitting there as if you told your dog to sit, kind of in that position. Now, when he shot it, he hit it in the head, and that central nervous system hit made its muscles all react all at once. So the rabbit's back feet both kicked, and it launched that rabbit straight into the air. So I'm just watching the bushes, and then this rabbit goes up, and I'm telling you, it went 8, maybe 10 feet into the air, did a couple of somersaults and came back down. 8 or 10 feet, that's 2.5, 3 meters. I mean, it went quite a ways up there. And when that happened, it was so spectacular that everybody was just yelling and screaming, whoa, whoa, and all, did you see that? Okay, now this is a very experienced group of hunters, and no one was really aiming in on it except Chuck, so I wasn't too concerned about the safety aspect of it. But people getting excited while hunting is something that happens. Now let me tell you another anecdote, also while jackrabbit hunting. I'm out there with just one other person, and he has never hunted jackrabbits before, so he's kind of excited about this. And he ends up shooting one, and he gets up to it and sees it dead, and he was very happy, and he literally started doing a song and dance number. I mean, singing and dancing and moving to the groovin', all the time with his rifle dancing around. I don't make this stuff up. When I talk about safety concerns, they are based on things that I have personally seen. And although my dance routine was intended for hyperbole, it wasn't very hyperbolic. Okay, I'm almost done, and as I go through this part, it might sound like I'm angry. I'm not. I'm just really disappointed in myself because there was something very important that I forgot. Now, in doing the reloading drill, I pull these empty casings out and just drop them on the ground, then reach for my new live rounds and reload the gun without looking at it. It takes a little longer to reload without looking at it, but I think that's very important because you need to keep your focus downrange and see what's going on. And I didn't explain that because I figured that it was obvious to just about everybody, and if it wasn't obvious to you, that you would at least give me credit for having a good reason for doing things the way I do them. Now, as far as dropping the shells on the ground, you do that in the interest of time. And it's odd that people seem to take offense to me just dropping those shells as opposed to putting them in my pocket or something. While they don't take offense to my auto-loading shotgun just kicking the shells out on the ground. It seems they only take offense to doing that with a double barrel. And the reason you drop those shells is in the interest of time. While you're sitting here playing around trying to get that shell in your pocket or something, the deer you just wounded gets away and you never find it. Trying to goof around with securing your empty shot shells or putting your speed loader for your revolver back in the pouch is a good way to ensure that your adversary kills you while you're reloading. There's reasons that I do the drills the way I do them. And I made the terrible mistake of forgetting that people quite frequently assume that if they don't understand why I'm doing it, I must be doing it because I'm stupid or incompetent. Now, I mentioned the person that commented, you can always open the action when you're reloading, when you lower the hammer. And no, you can't. Well, worse than a comment like that was the one person who replied to it with, I'm surprised Paul didn't see that. Now, when I read comments, I quite often read them in what I perceive to be the commenter's voice, and that was the voice I came up with that one. He's surprised that I didn't know that I could open the action. You can't open the action before lowering the hammer on this shotgun. But he finds it easier to believe that I'm stupid than it is to believe that just maybe I know how my gun works. And this is something that I have to deal with in this format, and it's something that I've had to deal with my entire life. I'll have something happen where someone's got to purchase 23 widgets or something, and they're $12 a piece, and they pull out their phone, start working their calculator. Hold on, 23 and $12 a piece, that's 276. And they'll look at me like I'm crazy, do the math. Of course, I'm right. How did you do that? Did you figure that out on your calculator? No, I successfully completed 4th grade math class. And they have a great deal of difficulty accepting that. it's easier for them to believe that I'm doing some kind of parlor trick than it is for them to believe that I completed the 4th grade. And this is something that I have to deal with, and I forgot that in filming part 1 of this presentation. So I didn't explain why you drop the shells on the ground. I didn't explain that thing about cocking both hammers and you still have one cocked while you're doing your celebratory dance. People think that's stupid because I didn't take the time to explain, yes, I've seen people do that. And it's easier for people to believe that I made that up because I'm an imbecile than it is for them to believe that I do have a little bit of experience in the field with firearms. And again, that is something that I forgot. And I could bore you all day with anecdotes. And I've mentioned the one before where the police officer pulled me over, not because I was committing any traffic violation, just because he saw me and thought I was a pins that had gotten away from my handler. And the irony is not lost on me that I'm talking about how people assume that I'm an imbecile, while I stupidly forgot that people assume that, and so there are certain things I have to include in presentations like this, such as demonstrating that you can't open this gun while that hammer is cocked. Because I made the horrible mistake of just thinking that everyone would give me credit for knowing how my shotgun works. And once again, my sincere apologies for having forgotten that, thus creating all of that commentary, thus creating the need for part 2. So as always, don't try this at home on what you call a professional, and thanks for watching part 2, and once again, yes, I really do know how my Rossi coach gun works.